Welcome back to episode 3 of The Urban Monk. This is Pedram Shojai. I am excited to share my dear friend Kaia with you. She is adorable. She has been writing for well.org and with us for a while. But when you get into like the nitty gritty of what just drives her, it's this other thing, this research that she's been doing for a very long time. And I was like, sister, get on the show. We need to talk about this because this is important and what it is gonna. We covered a lot of ground. We danced around a lot of very interesting subjects, but it's all about the silent goddess and really what happened to the feminine energy historically in our culture and what that has led to, and all the things that I get up and draw my sword for every day, which is the environment and the future and protecting our children and all this wonderful stuff. All of that has been downstream from this really dark place that we went in our history. And I'm gonna let Kaia talk about that because it was a really interesting episode. I think you're gonna really enjoy it. I did. I'll see you on the other side. Thanks for being here. Hi, and welcome to The Urban Monk. I'm Dr. Pedram Shojai here in studio with my dear friend Kaia VanZant. Hello.
Hey Pedram, I'm so happy to be here.
Nice to have you. This is going to be fun because we are going to talk about something a bit provocative today.
All right.
And this is because the world is so not used to having a conversation that is meaningful around this subject. Just so you all know out there, Kaia has written a book on this subject. She's dedicated a good part of her life to studying this era of early Christianity and the goddess and what happened with the goddess and just that the essence of the sacred feminine and the essence of where that pivot happened and how the masculine energy shifted. And I was just like, holy crap, you're on the show, let's talk about this. This is really, really important. Everything that I could trace back to in like environmentalism and like what we've done to the planet and a lot of the wars we've had and all this stuff can really pivot back to this interesting point in history that you talk about in your book. So I'd love to just kind of open up and talk about it on a meta level, and then let's just play with it.
Great, yeah, it sounds wonderful. So the era that you're referring to is the end of the goddess era, which was the 5th century in AD or CE. And Christianity was on the rise. It had been declared religion of the empire, which is the Mediterranean Empire at the time, the Roman Empire, right? And in all pagan practice was declared punishable by death. So pagan is a word that just means country dweller. So what essentially they were saying was, anything that's not Christianity, we don't care what it looks like, we're chasing you guys out of town. And it was pretty brutal and pretty ugly, and was the end of most of the earth-based religions that, from what survived of them, had to go underground from that point forward to avoid persecution.
From the get-go, we're talking about the folk religion of the people that lived in the area. And there's some of them, like, and we could talk about, Alexandria and the Gnostic tradition. There's some very well articulated stuff. Then there's kind of animism and shamanism and all kinds of things fell into that. But
Judaism fell into that.
Basically you're either with us or you're not, right? And so it became the imperial religion, and so the word pagan really took on a very different meaning. It took on a different flavor.
It was engineered to take on a different meaning. I went into that in my book. My book is called Written in the Ashes, for anyone who's listening. And within that sphere of paganism, where people are honoring of the earth, of one another. There's kind of a partnership in play in civilization that's about exploration and learning and discovery. And then the Christian religion comes in and kind of says, we want to be the only show in town, and we have the ultimate only truth. And that was a discarding of a lot of really precious, what were really strong ancient religions of that day that disappeared.
And so just to be clear, we're not talking about burning virgins, raping children, doing horrible atrocities and worshiping Satan, right? This is
you mean
what,
the pagan
The
religions.
pagan, yeah.
I was like, the Christians did some of that.
There was a lot of mob nastiness that
Yes.
happened at that time. So early stage Christianity had things that are really shameful. And there was a lot of stuff that happened, not by, let's say, Jesus, but like this mentality that became kind of the conquistador mentality that kept going, right? And we still do it. We still tear through forests and mine through mountains and do things that are not very...
Let's talk about the mentality that took over, because it's so interesting what happened to consciousness at this time. what really came into play around that 5th century era, where we have St. Augustine, right, the city of God, and we have the declarations of who exactly Jesus and Christ are within the Christian religion, is we end up with the establishment of a hierarchy, really for the first time in human civilization, wherein it's set up what was called later in the Renaissance era the great chain of being. Are you familiar with this term?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so great chain of being. We encounter this thought architecture every day. God on top, angels, man, woman, children, mammals, lesser animals, plants, rocks, right? And there was a lot of Renaissance art dedicated to the great chain of being and how this was the divine order. This shape, the great chain of being, looks like a ladder. Sometimes it gets called the great ladder of being. It's a missile, it's a rocket, it's a phallus, it's a skyscraper. It becomes the symbolism of consciousness of the entire era that has unfolded over the several thousand years to follow. And there's no judgment around like, oh, it's bad or something like that. It's to say it is a great erection of consciousness and exploration into what's taken us to Pluto and to Mars, and the exploration of science that has happened, that has come out of that. And we also notice, oh gosh, it's not so good for the earth. It's not so good. Having a hierarchy is not so good for the people who are on the bottom either, or for the animals.
There's something that happened in there which, it sounds really subtle at first, unless you're a female listening to this, is that the guy's on top. Right, and that was kind of just taken in as a presupposition in this great chain of being, and it went from having a matriarchy and having a system that really had like wise women who would be sought after within say pre-Christian traditions, to now saying get in line, daddy's on top, and so that is really the birth of a very different way of being. And so let's talk about what it looked like before then, because everything that's happened after then, we could trace back to all kinds of funkiness that may have originated here.
What so deeply interested me in my own research of my novel was that the goddess has been written out of history for the most part. Unless you're at higher levels of university study, women's studies, you're not learning about her in school, in grade school. And the earliest forms of human art that we find come out of 30,000 BC. 30,000 BC, we start finding these beautiful goddess-shaped figurines, like the Venus of Willendorf is one of the most famous ones. They have no feet, no hands. They have heads, breasts, usually a pregnant belly or just a full moon round tummy. And they're found in the hundreds all over the world, not even just in the Mediterranean, but especially in places like Çatalhöyük in Turkey and other areas we discover. These figurines are everywhere, and goddess worship was everywhere. And when you climb into the mind of human beings and what we knew about life at that time, we're right on the precipice of that sacred mystery all the time. Where does life come from? Where did we come from? What are we doing here? How do we make sense out of what's happening here? And they looked at that feminine symbol and said, life comes out of there. That's sacred, that's holy. And that really became the first human religion. You know what?
My wife is pregnant right now. Right, and it is
Congratulations.
Beautiful. Thank you. It is like every day. It's like you can't not think about the marvel and the miracle of life itself in that, and the embodiment of that inside of a pregnant woman, and just all that comes from it. And that was essentially the basis of a lot of this thinking. It's like, look, we don't get this thing. We don't get cosmology, but we get the miracle of life. And thank you, Great Mother, for bringing us into the world.
And it's intimate. It's happening in your home. Right? So these figurines, these goddess figurines that get found, now we've got to remember the last glacial ice age ended at 13,000 BC. So this goes all the way back to 30,000 BC. We're deep into the Neolithic, Paleolithic eras of goddess worship, wherein these statues are found in people's homes, like in a little nook in the living room or in the bedroom or above the kitchen. That's where they're excavating them from. And then gradually greater temples get built in Mesopotamia and Sumer, where the goddess is worshipped in much grander temples and grander figurines and that sort of thing all over the Mediterranean especially, which is where much of the research has been coming out of. And just to put it into perspective for 1 second here, Buddha was 500 BC. Judaism was founded like 2000 BC. So we're going way back, way back in time to the deep, deep roots of our ancestry here.
What does this have to do with the Aryans? Because, you know, you have like the book, like Abraham and, you know, the line of like the Abrahamic books, right? And Moses and Jesus and Muhammad arguably are all kind of from that the lineage
Yes.
of the Abrahamic traditions. And a lot of that coming from kind of the Aryan tribe and being more associated with sky god worship and all the things that they brought to the thinking once they came over into, say, the Mediterranean and then later Western Europe.
That is a theory, and it is one of two theories. One of the theories about the end of the goddess was, well, it was the conquering tribes of the north, right? They bring their lightning bolt gods and their special weapons, and they're able to completely eradicate the peaceful people. The other theory that's really interesting is from Dr. Leonard Schlein, who says, no, actually, the goddess was conquered by the alphabet. We discovered writing. We got really in about 2400, the first author, who was a woman. Her name was Enheduanna, and she lived in Sumeria. She was the high priestess of the entire city, and she left us a legacy of 42 hymns, some of which were considered to have been inspirations for biblical verse and even the Homerian epics that came later on. And her position in society gives us this vision of the entrance of written language, which was cuneiform. I even brought you an example of this for you to look at here. This is the first find. This is the earliest known writing. This is a mold of the earliest known writing. It's cuneiform. And we'll get a close-up shot of that for folks who want to see it. And it's a writing lesson. So if you notice, the top portions are duplicated on the bottom and not as well. So it's actually the first piece of writing ever to be found in the world, and it was an actual writing lesson, which would have been given by a woman in the temple to one of her students.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing.
Isn't that cool? I thought you'd love that. So in Enheduanna, who's writing in cuneiform, which is this early language that parallels the Egyptian hieroglyphs, starts writing hymns to the goddess. And the Sumer has this big goddess worshiping culture, and it's important to notice there that even though sometimes we think that means matriarchy, right, and a lineage of women, what it often means is simply partnership. Men and women working together in a peaceful society where everybody has a role and matters the same, right, equality, and not necessarily, again, back to that hierarchical model that wants to say, oh, now women are on the top.
Oh, they
Men
used to
are on
run
the top
show,
here.
right?
They used to run the show here. Yeah. So it's not exactly that. It's like, oh, there was this time where we honored the mystery of life in our lives and even of death in our lives. We honored those deep mysteries, and we lived in a society that was more peaceful for it. And with the rise of language within the second theory of Leonard Schlein, the mind becomes more left-brained, and we move into this left-brained world that's gotten established today. And with that, the right brain was sort of left behind. Not as much art, not as much development of agriculture in the sort of peaceful society way that people had been living in religion at that time.
Huh.
So, or was it marauding tribes of the north? Was it the rise of the alphabet? We don't know.
Unclear. We have this era now where Jesus comes and goes, and now Jesus' early followers are saying, hey, it's our way or the highway. And, you know, a lot of the Gnostic gospel was eradicated at this time. The Gnostics were the early thinkers and kind of the preservers of a lot of wisdom from the oldest days of antiquity.
Yes.
And so, you know, a lot of the stuff is in the Library of Alexandria and all this. Early Christians show up. They start saying, no, listen, this is now the imperial religion, and, you know, either our way or beat it.
They had the Nicene Council and the Council at Ephesus to decide what would go in the Bible and what would be left out. And the Gnostics were often cases looked at as Christian heretics because they included things like the goddess. In fact, even in early Genesis, Jehovah had a mother, but in the Gnostic tradition, and his mom was often coming into the room and like scolding him, like, now, God. And that all gets shoved off to the side, like, no, we don't want that to be the representation of the Bible. But we found it later in the Gnostic Gospels that were found, of course, with the Dead Sea Scrolls and at Nag Hammadi.
Yeah, they were talking about like 1948, all this stuff gets unearthed.
Yes.
And all of a sudden it's like, ooh, there's this other kind of deeper read into biblical times, but it didn't quite make the edit.
Right.
Intentionally or unintentionally, really. So in the council, it was intentional. So the question is, had this stuff actually made it over to the council? Like, was this part of the information that was available to the council, and they decided against it? We don't know, or do we?
I don't know as much of that era in terms of decisions that were made around Christianity, but I know the results. We all have experienced the results. And the era that I chose to write about was about Hypatia, who was running, she was a woman, who was a great teacher, philosopher, arguably the first philosopher, scientist in history, female. And she was unfortunately really brutally murdered by the Christians, by either the mob or specifically by the bishop's henchmen. We weren't entirely sure. I explored that in the novel. But that really set the stage for everything that came to follow because her death was so successful. They persecuted her as a witch. They persecuted her for black magic, which was a scary thing. Sorcery in Egypt was like, woo, the evil eye. It was a frightening thing. So they created a propaganda campaign to say this woman is using sorcery and black magic. And they scared the populace into acting against her. And it was so successful, the same bishop of that era, Bishop Cyril, actually exiled 200,000 Jews into the desert in the same breath as persecuting her. And he just established Christianity within Alexandria so successfully that it became modeled later on in the witch hunts, in the Inquisition, in now the 1300s all the way through to about 1800, where the witch hunts were really prevalent because they had worked in the past. And we had that scapegoat of, oh, witch, black magic, blame the woman.
How much of this was originally just intended to undermine the authority of this? I mean, she was a powerful player she was running the Library of Alexandria. Yes. I mean, she was a baller. Like she was it. And the fact that she had this type of respect as a woman needed to be undermined. And so, like, it almost seems like this deed was able to then be replicated to this day.
Yes.
I mean, we got glass ceilings everywhere in corporate America.
Yeah.
And so why are women not at an equal footing with men, and how is that fair? Could this scar really be one of the original wounds that is kind of a reflection of all of it?
I think so, because what we lost at that era was that the value of life, the sense of equality, the partnership model of connection and linking that Rianne Eisler says was later replaced by ranking, which is again that hierarchical model. Well, somebody's got to be on top and somebody's got to be on the bottom. I think it's so important to look at, when we look back at the past, like, to be good detectives. And if you've ever spoken to a great detective, they'll tell you when you come to a crime scene, you want to look for what's there, certainly, but you also want to look for what may be missing. And as we look back through history, we look into the Bible, the King James Version. There's no mention of the goddess anywhere. There's hardly any women mentioned in the Bible at all. And this is the first text where they're absent. And so that's interesting. We go back even further and actually brought this for you to see, which is great. This is, Pedram.
For those of you who are listening, it's also on YouTube. Find it, Find it there.
Pedram, this is a 5th grade history book. This is world history, 5th grade, 10 years old. Our kids are going to get there, right? And just to give you a sense of where women figure in this book, in the history of the goddess. First of all, the history of the goddess is not mentioned in this book. It's 700 pages long. And as you get into it, we'll go very quickly into the women who are mentioned because there are only 5 of them.
In a 700-page
history book? In a 700-page world global history book. So, written out of history. I'm not kidding. I'm brought the proof of it. We have Hatshepsut, who was a great Egyptian queen. She gets the first mention of a woman on page 127. And then we go forward a little bit. Cleopatra, right? Inevitably. And we carry on and go to Sondok, who is one of the princesses of Korea. And then finally, Empress Theodora, and it ends with Harriet Beecher Stowe.
World history, that's it. Now, just to give you some perspective on this book, which is widely circulated in America and taught to all children, this was my experience of growing up, was being 8 years old, 9 years old, learning world history and going, there's no women
anywhere, they don't matter. They're just making babies, and men are the only ones who matter, who make any difference in the world. And for me, along with other things that had happened to me at that time, I went, I was born the wrong gender. I want to make a difference in the world. What should I do? I'll cut off my hair and just start wearing boy clothes so that I can get the freedom and the exoneration and the things that boys get to enjoy that girls not so much. So yeah, this book is really interesting in that capacity. I would say that as I was looking through it, I was like, gosh, I wonder how much credence they give to like all the other traditions and cultures. Is this just like a white man's history book? And as I was looking through, I was like, well, I wonder how much attention they give to Australia. So women get 5 pages. Australia gets 1 page in this 700-page history book. So yeah, just to give you an idea of like how slanted the versions of history are that we're learning, and how sanitized. Because there's no mention of religion in this book anywhere. And what we know from looking back at our earliest ancestors, they wanted to make meaning of this world. How did we get here? What are we doing here? Where do our children come from? Is there something we're supposed to be doing while we're here? And all of the wonderment as we look up at the stars and just go, how did we get here on this incredible spinning blue ball? That's not here in this book. This book says, Pedram, in a couple thousand years from now, we're going to excavate your life and find something that you had for breakfast on your plate. And we're going to discover that it was like, some eggs and maybe a little bit of kale. And you ate on a porcelain plate with a silver spoon or fork. And that is the sum total of the value of your life. What you had for breakfast on what particular artifact it was sitting on. And the loss of this is like a ripple that's gone through culture where meaninglessness has taken over. And you just see it everywhere. You see it in the media. You see it in the choices we make. We make these choices for disposable everything, where we're just piling up trash in our culture, and the meaninglessness has taken over.
It's interesting. I was having this conversation about ISIS and how horrible the atrocities in the Middle East are right now.
The terror group, not the goddess, right?
The terror group,
Yeah.
and the fact that it's named after a goddess, or the acronym comes out to that of the goddess, is horrific. And the essence of how this is happening and why it's catching and taking on fire and all this is, at least they have a narrative. At least they're talking about an afterlife, and they're giving a promise of something outside of this meaningless world. And although it's horrific and horrible and disgusting and just, it's a dead end, at least that separation of church and state gives them some sort of meaning, whatever that is, because humans need that.
Yes.
And you look at the Western world and we're like, oh my God, what are they doing? And they're just in this place where they need someone to give them a narrative, and it's working for whoever's driving or puppeteering that crap, right? Now, going back to this era, you and I had an offline conversation that really inspired me, saying you need to come on the air here. Is something interesting happened when the early Christian Roman Empire finally decided to kind of make its stamp. And it was in the extraction of history, in the rewriting of history that happened there, that to me was incredibly, if you look at it in terms of like evil genius, it was really forward thinking, right? Like, damn, like you kind of nailed that, right? So talk to us a little bit about what happened with the history of mankind, and how at that time in the burning of Alexandria, all of a sudden, like, they hit reset on history and controlled the narrative, and all this delicious, beautiful stuff for 30,000 years prior suddenly disappeared.
Yes. Well, one of the reasons for that is because archaeology was not really made into a science until the end of the 1800s. So we're in the Victorian era. You can think Victorian era, mostly Europe, Western Europe, and you have men, it's a man's career, who go and explore all of the history that's come before through the lens of their own cultural upbringing without even realizing that they're doing it. So they find all of these wonderful artifacts and think, oh, what is this goddess stuff? Oh, fertility cult. And fertility cult is the term that takes over this whole period of time, because they're honorable Christian men living in this age of Victorian, often England, and wanting to make sense of the world through that lens. So that happens all over the place, especially in archaeology, where only now, just we're at the beginning of starting to look back and go, maybe we had our goggles on as we were looking at the facts, and now we can start to take those off a little bit more and see where even today, the goddess has been written out of history, or women, the subjugation of women, even today, are not valued. Their contributions aren't valued. I sometimes play a game, and it did throughout the writing of my novel, especially as I was interviewing, scholars and teachers and all kinds of experts about it. Do you want to play my game?
Let's play.
Okay, so I give you a minute to come up with 10 women who made a contribution to history, to name them. Can you name 10 women in 1 minute?
Okay, ready to go? Amelia Earhart, why not? Let's start there.
Okay, great.
Amelia Earhart. It wouldn't be fair if I said Cleopatra, because she was already...
It's okay.
She was already... Sweet, look at that. Eleanor Roosevelt. Rosa Parks. I'm typing just to keep count, but I guess I don't need to do that.
I'm keeping count right here.
You're counting them right there. Okay. Oh God.
Rosa Parks, Eleanor Roosevelt.
Yeah. Amelia, Cleopatra.
Amelia Earhart, Cleopatra.
Hypatia. Now I'm just blanking because I'm on the spot. Marilyn Monroe.
Sure.
She's
I'll give you Marilyn Monroe,
a cultural icon that did things, right? Who else? Famous scientists.
Marie Curie.
Marie Curie, yes, thank you. Famous biologists. How about Florence Nightingale?
Florence Nightingale, absolutely.
Yeah, no, if you go back, there's millions of them. Obviously, Mother Teresa.
Mother Teresa. Are we at a minute yet?
Yeah, we just hit a minute.
We just hit a minute, so you got 9.
Okay.
That is really a good score. I talk to people who can only name 4. And the reason why is because we are enculturated to believe that women don't matter. It's not that they haven't been making these contributions throughout history. I mentioned in Hey Duana, who wrote these 42 hymns in Sumer, right? To Inanna, Lady of the Largest Heart was one of the names of her poems. First author in human history. She's not mentioned in the history books. No one learns her name in school. And it's only because we just don't value the women. We're not taught to value the women. And for me as a woman growing up in this society, it taught me to not value myself or even my own voice. And that's really the reason why I'm making this film, The Silent Goddess, because I feel that the silencing of the goddess has been the silencing of women, has been the change that has happened within us, where we've given ourselves permission to either play small or make excuses like, not educated enough, or I've got to lose 20 pounds before I do that, or we make these excuses around using our voice, sharing our voice, and living to our fullest potential and our wildest dreams, and also letting ourselves matter, letting the weight of ourselves matter. And I feel that it's so important right now, especially because in the West, we have the resources. The women have the resources to make a huge difference. And we do. We're the ones who do most of the shopping for most of our households, right? Mm-hmm. And we have the impact to be able to reach out to our global societies, to our brothers and sisters who really need the help and the support to also become empowered to be more successful in their own lives.
It's funny, you look at micro-lending and all this stuff that's happening globally for impoverished communities, and the banks and the lenders have found it to be much more successful to lend money to the females.
Yes.
Because they get it, and they got to take care of their community, they got to take care of their kids, they take care of their family, and they're responsible.
They circle back to the community, you said it.
And they bring the money back.
Yep.
And it's a safe bet, and microlending to women in communities has been wonderful. And we're seeing it across the board all over the place. It's like this, it's funny, there's this resurgence of this ethic that comes with being a family person and being part of a community that's happening around women all over the world. And the advertising always goes after the woman. She's the head of the household. She's the consumer. She's the one. So it's like, it's kind of like right there in front of us. It's like this central pivot of like everything our economy runs on. Yet, know your place. Get down on the ladder, you know I'm above you, right? And there's this weird like paternalistic, flippant attitude that still is out there.
It's only because we are not questioning it. We're just accepting it. And even the women, we're accepting it. And it's time to start questioning it and speaking to honorable men like yourself who are also questioning it, who want a relationship with a woman who's their equal, who's bringing her wisdom and her life experience and her deep, deep love to the table to relate with.
And that's what we're missing. That's what it's all aberrations. Like goddess worship is made out to be this weird thing, right? It's like a fertility cult. But like then again, like all these guys, their relationship with intimacy is porn, and they don't understand love. They don't understand any of the stuff that would actually make them feel whole and make them be able to be with a woman instead of all these mismatches that happen. Like we don't understand each other because I don't think guys are even trained to understand women. They're trained to, you know, kind of go off and tolerate women. It's just this weird culty thing that happens in like the upbringing of a man in our culture that's lasted this.
You speak to that. You're the man at the table. What is your experience with that?
Oh, chicks are crazy, man. You know, you're emotional, you're weird, you know, you don't get it, and you know you're always about things that don't matter, and you know just let me run the show here because you know you're just unpredictable, and and to a certain extent this is something I think about a lot, is that the leveraging of the female mind is ingenious, right? Because you're not pretty enough, you need my eyeshadow. You're not thin enough, you need my diet thing, right? You're not worthy enough because you don't have the right purse. And it's just like this marketing has been pounding the female psyche. It's the same with guys. I mean, you see it on the other side. It's like real men drive this truck, right? But it's all bullshit, right? But it's like, it's just women are so sensitive to it, and they've been like pummeled by it for so long that like I can't, like it pains me to see how much buy-in there is into this false notion of beauty and security and femininity and all of it. And so it permeates every fabric of our culture though. So it's like, you know, that's partially why I was like, hey, get on the show, let's throw a gauntlet about this. And we're not the first and we won't be the last, but like, this is an important conversation.
Yes.
And you know, as we watch the way industry tears through the planet's resources and we pollute the oceans and we pollute the air, it is a very paternalistic, rocket ship phallic way of going about things, and shit, it ain't working.
Well, it's not working anymore. We've come to the end of that age where it was working, and now we're realizing the damage that it's doing. And if you're conscious, if you're aware today, you're probably experiencing the pain of watching what's happening. And that's really hard because we want to numb ourselves. And for a lot of us, that means indulging in frivolity and just turn on the TV. I just want to watch a show. I don't want to feel what's really happening. And it's really important that we open up ourselves to our own hearts, to the depth of that feeling, to see what's really happening and open our eyes to it and say, let's dream build a different experience here. Let's co-create something really fantastic and envision a future that is so much greater than even our ancestors could have imagined for our own grandchildren. That is green, that is sustainable, that has so much community and connection. Because I think we've gone as far as we can possibly go. The pendulum has swung to that nth degree of disconnect. We're anxious, we're disconnected, we're isolated, and at the same time, we've never had so much connection. We've got the internet, we've got texting, we've got instant message, everything, but it's not filling the hole. It's not doing it.
If you're a woman listening to this right now or watching this right now, what would be the first couple steps towards kind of stepping back into the power that we're talking about, the comfort that we're talking about, and just that sense of belonging and community and connection and owning your personal power as a female, and not trying to pretend to be a dude in a dude's world?
Yes, that is such an important point, Pedram, because we see women come into power and then we go, it seems like she's got a dick, you know, and it's just not appealing to any of us. And then we see women who are really in their power in a feminine way, and it's not as rare in leadership positions, but I'm hoping and seeing that it's becoming more common. I mean, my own personal journey with the question that you are asking has really been about taking back the voices in my head, because my father invented moisturizing lotion in 1953. I grew up in the beauty industry. Every square inch of you was judged, and it better be, you know, to the right caliber of expectation. And not necessarily by him, but just by the air that we breathe, by the culture that we live in, by the fact I grew up in Los Angeles, you know, all of that. And the voices in my head have always been, you're not thin enough, you're not pretty enough, or you're the wrong shape. And I have let those voices in the past in my life shut me down and say, and take prominence to give myself permission to, oh, maybe I shouldn't put myself out there. I'll be judged as harshly as I'm judging myself. I hardly think so. But this is the inner conversation of all women, because we've been sold, you've got to be a size 0 with a thigh gap and giant boobs, and you've got to be 18 forever on top of it. And no one can live up to that. So it's really, what I've seen and felt for myself and for the women in my own life, is we come into full bloom when we're witnessed by the loves in our life. Whether you're married to a man or to a woman, or it's the love of your children, this profound sense of connection, of witnessing a woman's beauty and letting yourself as a woman drink it in. Whatever witnesses you have in your life, maybe it's your girlfriends, take in their perspective and try to see yourself through those eyes, and set aside the tapes of self-criticism. I actually have to stop myself when I hear the tapes and I go, oh, there's that tape again. I'm not listening to you. You don't have validation in my life anymore. And it takes that kind of conscious effort to stop and put your foot down. Are you driving? Going on a run a couple of days ago, I had that experience. I had to stop and put my foot down and say, no, I'm not listening to you. You don't get precedence in my consciousness. And that's really what's before us to do. We have to take it back individually that way.
So now if I'm a guy listening to this and I go, ooh, that's a thing, and I'd like to maybe do something differently, right?
That was very dude of you.
Yeah, we're dumb, right? We're like, oh shit, maybe she's onto something, right? So what do I go home and say to my girlfriend or my wife? What do I go home and say to my daughter? Like, how do guys start to bridge over? Because it's almost like, I can tell you, like, culturally, like a gender culture it's almost like a concession of power. And like once you have power, you don't want to kind of give it up. And guys don't know how good we got it, right? Until you start thinking about like the gender inequality, and then it's just like, well, why would I give up edge? Like I've got advantage, right? And I know a lot of guys who like know that their wife is right, but they won't admit it, because then it fucks the boundary that they had already set by, like, you know, being in a one-up position, and it's terrible. It's no way to live.
It's unpleasant. And it's unfulfilling. And when you can come to that acknowledgement, oh gosh, it's unpleasant, it's unfulfilling. The pain that I've heard so many men express to me around their relationships with women has been, they brush off all the compliments. They don't go in. A guy says, oh, you have gorgeous eyes. And she goes, oh, well, they're not as pretty as my best friends. Or, oh, I didn't do my makeup today. Or, oh, you have such a pretty smile. Oh gosh, well, there's no women coming up and just saying, thank you. That feels great to receive that. Thank you. And that's an empowerment around women, that they can give that gift back to their men, as the men in turn really have to hold the women down, I feel, at this point in society, and say, I want you to get this. I think your smile is sexy, woman. You know, and she's like, whoa, okay, that went in. He's got to push through and penetrate and be that masculine ability to get past her gatekeepers in her own head and reach her heart. And that takes risk.
Well, it takes risk, it takes vulnerability, and it also takes intent.
Yes.
Right? You have to understand that she's got all this stuff between you and that compliment that might be intercepting, is what I'm hearing. And so a compliment, okay, so that's a great start. It's like, hey, you look beautiful, I love what you did with your hair. Oh, shut up, you're just saying that. No, really.
Yeah,
right?
Hear me.
I'm taking time out of both of our days to acknowledge that your hair looks great. Like,
and I've learned this with my toddler too. It makes such a difference when you use eye contact and you get the person right in front of you and you take them by the hands and you look in their eyes and say, I got this thing to tell you. Because suddenly you're like, ooh, intimacy. This is real, rather than somebody across the room just dropping a line and you just kind of brush it off. It's not as connected.
So we have this like Mars-Venus thing that we could get into, obviously, which is, you know, y'all kind of run differently than we do, and there's different types of communication and all that, but that's, I think, a separate conversation. Let's just talk about kind of the meta of power dynamics and how there can be power sharing in the household. There can be, you know, we can relinquish that thing. Like guys, like we feel like we need to be in control, if not our authority or our power or something's gonna get undermined. And then like we're just in a one down position, and then like if I admit that I'm wrong, then I'm always gonna be fucking wrong and she's gonna be on my ass about it, right? It's just, I know a lot of guys that just can't let go because they're afraid the woman's going to take advantage of that as well. And so how would I as a guy do that, right? Like how can we acknowledge that you have wisdom?
Well, how do you do it with your own wife?
I do it all the time. I say I'm sorry.
You say you're sorry?
I say I'm sorry.
Well,
yeah.
It's that simple, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm just like, you know what? You were right. I didn't see it that way, but I totally see what you're saying, and you're right, I made a mistake. And you should see, like the first few hundred times that happened, like I could see my wife's eyes kind of doing this little like shaking thing, and it just kind of stopped and locked in. And it was like, holy shit, did you just do that? Right? And it was like, you know, like I could just like keep escalating and fighting, but like she was actually right. She had a point. She saw something that I wasn't willing to look at, and she had a point. And so, you know, for me, it was, at first it was very difficult, especially, you know, 12 years ago, you know, you were bred to kind of think and act and jockey in position in a certain kind of like group dynamic, herd dynamic kind of way. But that's no way to live, right? It's like the jockeying for power doesn't actually work for a loving household. It's like this societal thing that we think we need to do, and we're in competition with the woman in our lives in this like power struggle in the household. It doesn't exist. It doesn't work that way, right? It's about a partnership. And I don't know very many people that grew up in households with like a true partnership to model after, right? So like my generation is like, okay, well, how do you coexist with a wife who also has a career and is doing more shit than I am around the house and is way more patient with the kid? You know, I might be able to like lift the garbage and take it out easier, but she kicks my ass over here. And so, you know, it's just gray area right now. Like we don't know because our society has been so scrambled for so long outside of that balance that came in that kind of that era that you're talking about.
Well, Shakespeare says comparisons are odious, which means they stink.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever we're comparing ourselves to one another, to our parents, to the way we think we ought to be, we're going to be unhappy. And it's about letting those go and being able to say, let's be real, let's be in partnership, and let's dance. And sometimes you step on each other's feet when you're dancing, and that's part of it, and you laugh it off and you keep dancing, and you get better at dancing as you're with your partner. That's the idea.
So we had a rewriting of history at the time of this Roman Empire rise in Christianity, and basically, you know, nothing before now matters. History starts now. This is the new way. This is how we roll.
Yes.
And now we're kind of waking up from a hangover.
Yes,
right.
I think so. I mean, and I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater either, because I was raised in Christianity, and there's so much beauty in that religion. Christ was a healer. The Christ love and the love of Mary. I mean, these are pieces of that religion that for me are still sacred and profound. But we can look at the hierarchical damage that was done to women, to children over the course of time, and see now that we need to stitch the fabric back together. In our offline conversation, I was mentioning this to you, that I have this theory with the burning times, which is the time of the witch hunts, which stretched through Europe about 1300 to 1500. And I'm specifically, of course, speaking to white women here because there were no Africans in Europe at that time. But the idea of that this was happening at this time to these women, this was your closest family that could be turned against you. Your sister, your mother, your grandmother could be put on the stand and asked to turn in own family members as witches. And it created this deep seed of suspicion and terror within all of the communities. And there's the terror being put on trial, of course, but the reality was far more damage was done and more deaths came from your neighbors. Even than being put on trial, your neighbors would just decide, oh, she's a witch, and the mob would get you, And this happened in so much time for 500 years that now, today, I feel that there's still that the residue, if you will, of that left over, especially among the sisterhood and communities of women. Like if you're married and your husband cheats on you, who are you going to be mad at? The other woman. Right? How accountable is he? Well, he's just a dumb dude. He's my husband. I'm going to be mad at this woman how dare she? And we have this sense of, well, wait a second, we lost the fabric of sisterhood. And, obviously I'm a white woman, so I don't see it as much within, I have my own white people lens on, but with the Black communities that I've spent time with and my Black friends, there's this incredible camaraderie and sense of sisterhood that I've even been envious of, where I've said, oh man, I wish I had that in my own life. And I think it's up to women to not only reclaim ourselves, but reclaim our sisterhood and our friends and say, oh, I was really envious of that woman, or I was jealous, and I've got to take her into my arms. And I'm, at this time in my life, friends with many of my ex-boyfriends, many of their wives and girlfriends, and it feels so good to have this extended community of sisterhood where we love one another, call each other up, ask questions, how's your kid, can you give me advice on this? And it's just this beautiful stitching of the fabric back together. Now, I was not raised that way. I grew up suspicious of other women. They were going to take my boyfriend away. I had a few close girlfriends, others who were outside my close girlfriend circle I wasn't sure about. And eventually, it just, as I started especially practicing yoga, I was like, oh, I got to let all that go. And especially coming into being a mother, if there's any moms listening, they know this experience of from the time your child is born, the great surprise is that you become the mother of all children everywhere. And anytime you ever hear about a mother who's lost a child or gone through something, it hits you like it could be your own child, and you feel for her in the depths of your soul. And that bond of sisterhood, I feel, is seriously what could save the planet when we really rekindle that fire.
It just rings so true and beautiful, and I want to thank you for sharing that. That's just, people don't talk about this stuff. Like, what is sisterhood? It's made out to be this weird thing, right? And when you actually talk about your connection with the other females in your life, more than 50% of the human population, it's like, how does this gender not getting along with its own?
Yeah.
Well, and a lot of that's been orchestrated.
Yes,
and so
orchestrated.
I love that. And so if you're listening to this, really see where this applies in your own life. See how you can extend back out to the loved ones, the females in your life, and see where you can rekindle this true sense of sisterhood. So as I listen to this, and I'm a dude, I think to myself, right on. I mean, this is beautiful, this is powerful, and this is a conversation worth having around the dinner table, in our communities, in our society, and all of it. And so thank you. I know it's not easy, and we're not. Look, I am super down for the message of Christ and everything that the religion represents. I just take issue with what people and empires and corruption do to religion.
Absolutely.
And so we have this scar in the fabric of the history of Western civilization that started with saying we're going to eradicate history and move all this stuff around, and girls go over here, and that's just. And
they were successful. Even still today, women don't have a place in the church. And you've got to remember, in the Goddess times, women ran the churches. Like women and the pieces of where they belonged within the church. Sex was sacred in these societies. Women belonged in the highest religious offices, and they were in charge of, religious lands and religious rites and sacred rites. And you still see this with the pagan religions today, where there's the goddess religions and the women are often doing the ceremonies. And it's starting to come back. Like, women can be rabbis now, but if you go into the evangelical churches, no women welcome. And if you go deeper into Islam, the men are the ones who are really getting the opportunity to be at the feet of that great divine Allah, right? Not so much the women.
It's a real regression, I think, my personal opinion, in how we can coexist as a species and how we can move forward together. The repression of the mothers of our children seems like a really bad idea, right? And so
yeah, well, if you look at, you mentioned ISIS earlier, the Islamic State. This is a culture where women are profoundly disenfranchised. They have no say. And we see this all over the world, that where women are disenfranchised and they have no say, you end up with the most violent possible societies. And the Christians were the first ones to author this idea of the great hereafter. And it's important to, I think, be empathic about where it came from, because at the time of the goddess religions, I don't mean to completely romanticize it, although I tend to, there's no penicillin yet, there's no Novocaine, there's no even understanding of bacteria and how diseases spread. So it's just like the infliction of the will of heaven is how it's looked at, right? Who knows why these terrible plagues are coming through, or whatever's killing off your cow or your family or whatever. And what happens is Christianity comes onto the scene and says, we have the reason. We're all suffering here because it's about being in the great hereafter later on, where we're going to be with God and Christ, and everything will be in heaven, which was the idea brought by St. Augustine. And then the same thing with Islam, right? It's about the 40,000 virgins, where you get to in the afterlife. And so everything you do here is about getting there. And it puts the sacredness of the divine outside of our world, whereas the goddess puts the divine inside our world, in everything we do, in the beautiful mystery of your wife who's going to give birth to a new child who you don't know, who you haven't met yet, who you can't wait to meet. Oh my gosh, I wonder what her personality is going to be like. And that mystery that we can cozy up to and snuggle up to. That's why I want to call this film The Silent Goddess, because she's still with us. She's just silent, and we need to turn up the volume.
I love it. So Kaia has been talking to me about wanting to make this movie. We talked about it about a week ago, and I said, hell yes, you have 100% of our support, so whatever it takes to help make this movie. She has an Indiegogo campaign that she's launching right now. Let's help her make this movie and help bring up the volume on the Silent Goddess. I think that this is a really powerful course correction for our planet, the woman on our planet and the men on our planet. It's what we need. It's good medicine, and I know you're going to be talking to a number of the greatest thinkers in this space and really kind of walk the earth and capturing this story. And so let's help her make this movie. It's well.org/Silent Goddess. There'll be a link to her Indiegogo campaign, and she has our support for distribution and all that. And I just think that this is a project that's worth making, and when we talk about it, you lit up. So I know that this is a continuation of your life's work, and you're going to help and touch a lot of lives with it. Yeah, and everyone who gives will get a copy of my book too, so it'll be fun to share. Fantastic. I want to close with you with a poem that I wrote, but it's work in progress, but it's going to go in the film. So I think for me, putting my words and my thoughts and feelings into writing really is where I find the thrust of what I have to say. So this poem is called Woman. Will you define yourself on your own terms for all the beauty you possess? Or by the voice of, you're too much, you're never enough, you're a bitch, a cunt, an idiot, you're crazy, admit it. Woman, blamed for centuries. Eve and the serpent still in exile, somewhere in Africa, walking miles for water. Somewhere in Afghanistan, facing bullets to read and write. Somewhere in Yemen, a refugee wondering how the hell to feed her family. Somewhere in Thailand, kidnapped and sold into sex slavery. Somewhere in America, silenced by the comparison to another Kardashian on TV. I'm not blind. My eyes work just fine. Everywhere the online media pornography industry informs me that I'm seen and valued only for my youth and beauty. That my body is the sum of my importance. I dare you to take my measurements, to tell me that the size of my breasts and the color of my skin are more important than the heart that beats inside of them. I am more than this. You are more than this. We are more than the shoes, the skirts, the stockings, the eyeliner, more than the name on any fashion label, and more than any barrier we may ever face together. We are the living dreams of our grandmothers,
and the dreams we hold so dear for our own grandchildren. So how will you judge me? By the size of my breasts or by the size of the love inside them? How will you judge me? By the color of my skin or by the radiance of my soul? How will you judge me? By the lines in my face or by the ageless beauty in my heart? I am a woman. I love fiercely. I love ferociously. I love unapologetically. I even love to forgive those who have hurt me. What does it mean to be a woman? Who will you be? Tell me.
That's beautiful. That is beautiful.
Thank you.
You're like a fierce lioness who's just radiating when you're reading it too. It's just so, like you embody the power and the beauty that you're talking about. And so
thank you. What a lovely acknowledgement.
Thank you for accepting that. Right? And for anyone who's listening, accept acknowledgement. On behalf of my gender to yours. I'm sorry. And let's get this right.
Apology accepted.
Yes. All right. We've solved the world's problems. Get some tea. This is it. Like this is the kind of conversation that needs to happen at every dinner table, and just a slight course correction. Just turn the goddess back up. It brings beauty and just meaning and truth to every household and every family. So
yeah, you said it.
well.org/silent goddess. Please support this movie. She has our support. We are going to do everything to make this happen and get this message out to make the world a better place. Kaia, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Pedram. It was really a delight and honor to be here with you today.
The delight and honor are right back at you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed it. I love this subject. I think it's so juicy. I think it's such a relevant conversation. Hope you did too. Let me know. If you're on iTunes, please subscribe. YouTube, please subscribe, all that good stuff. But give us comments. And also, I'm really passionate about this. I am 100% in support of this. We are helping get this going with Kaia with an Indiegogo campaign. So if this sparked you, please go over well.org/silent goddess and help support the cause. We're going to go out there and help her make this movie and share this message because it's important. If you think it's important, let me know. Thanks for being here. Love you.